Today I'm going to show how I created these 3D printed custom keycaps for this macro keyboard with just PrusaSlicer. And then I'll show how they can be printed on a Prusa MK3 with an MMU2 unit or a single color Ender 3. I mentioned in a previous video that I'm planning to put out more videos on PrusaSlicer. But when I pulled up the changelog on just the alpha release, I realized it was going to take a lot more than just a couple videos. So I thought I should do a little work to help streamline my process. Which is when I remembered that recently there was a macro keyboard project in one of the Alien 3D subscription boxes that I had not built yet. If you aren't aware of the Alien 3D box, it's an awesome monthly box that comes in a couple different varieties. I get the full Alien box, which includes 4 different filament samples, a gadget or a tool, and non-3D printed parts to be used in a 3D printing project. And typically there's one big mothership prize that is given out to a random subscriber each month. This project was included in the September 2021 UFO box. That month, the mothership prize was a full Camera. The 4 filament samples just happen to be all from VO3D. This isn't typical to have them all from the same manufacturer. The bonus accessory was a silicone magnetic soldering mat and our project, the macro keyboard. At the bottom of the project description are 2 links, one to the modified case files that will print from Prusa printers and another to the assembly instructions. So I jumped over to Prusa printers and did a search for some printable keycaps. I found these simple looking keycaps published by Shib Nick Nee that looked like a good starting place. So if we look at the files, there's one single keycap file called keycap1u, and that's the one that we're going to grab. So let's bring that into PrusaSlicer and have a look at it. One quick thing to note on these keycaps, they are directional. The center mounting section is wider than it is taller, and the skirt on the bottom flares out. So keep that in mind to maintain the orientation while we're working on these. For reference, here's a closer look at the keys that I've already printed and that we're going to be creating. Note that this keycap came in with this error over here. PrusaSlicer found 35 open edges and has gone ahead and auto-repaired them. But we can go ahead and make that a little bit more permanent by right-clicking and click Fix through NetFab. I'm going to go ahead and click the printer configuration over to use the MMU2 unit. This can easily be added pre-configured from the configuration wizard inside the slicer. This is primarily because it's going to be a lot easier while we're first building these out to just go ahead and use the pre-configuration. When it comes time to print, I'll swing back around and show how to print these without an MMU on any printer that supports the M600 pause function. Our first keycap is going to be for record. It's just going to have a circle. This one's pretty easy. We can use the add part feature to add a circle, or in this case a cylinder, to our existing keycap. Notice how it's taken the keycap and the cylinder and grouped them together. This way, when I'm working with the group, I can move them together, but I also can address each one individually. So in this case, we need to make our cylinder dramatically smaller. When we scale things with the outer handles in PrusaSlicer, it scales from the center, so it's floating up in the air. You can use the drop to bed icon down here to drop it down and settle it on the bed. It's a lot easier to flip this over and look from the bottom side to get our sizing. And when we look back over at the coordinate system over here, when we click on the main keycap file, that's the coordinates for the build plate. We click on the keycap file itself, that's its position relative to the group, and the same thing when we click on the cylinder. So essentially, because the keycap file is the primary file, we click on the cylinder here and we can see its relationship to that file. So we can change our X position to 0 to center it in the X axis, and we can do the same thing for Y. Now, because we've got that flared skirt on there, it's centering to the widest point, which is not the part that we're going to see. So I'm going to move this over just a little bit so we can visually center it to the center part of the top of the keycap. Now when we move that, it actually moved our keycap up so we can drop it down to the bed. Our cylinder is still way too tall. I'm going to print these at a 0.2 millimeter layer height, and I only want to do 2 layers. So it will be 0.4 millimeters. Notice that I forgot to unlock the scale factor, so it scaled the whole thing. We'll undo, unlock, change to 0.4, drop to the bed. Now it looks really nice until we click off of it and we realize that we're printing with the same filament. I'm going to select the cylinder and tell it to print with the second extruder. Our first keycap is done. Another thing we can do in here is we can come over and double click on that group name and rename it so that we can keep our groups separate, because we're going to have 8 keycap files in here eventually. Could copy and paste this group and delete the cylinder, but it's a little bit easier just to bring in another file. Now notice that it's coming back with an error. So if we duplicated this group and deleted it, we wouldn't have to fix this through NetFab. Now I said this was going to be just done with PrusaSlicer, but I'm also going to give you another little tip here. If you happen to be working on the Windows platform, you can open up a file in the Windows 3D Builder that's built into Windows 10. Import the model, and it will find any errors, and it will want to correct them, and then we can save our file back as an STL, and we bring that file back in, it's fixed. Now another option we could have done is, once we right-clicked and fixed this through NetFab, we could have gone up underneath the file, export, and exported the plate as an STL. We can't export an individual file. But if we'd have brought just the keycap into PrusaSlicer, fixed it as our very first step, and then saved the plate back as an STL file, then we could have had that file come back in fixed each time. But when I run into a situation like this, it's usually just easier for me to double click on the file inside Windows Explorer, fix it through 3D Builder, and then bring them in. It's all personal preference. If you're using a Macintosh, I'm sorry. I don't know any other way to fix it there. I know there's got to be some other tools, but this situation fixing through PrusaSlicer will work on all platforms, Windows, Linux, and Macintosh. Our next keycap is going to be the pause button. Now there's several different ways we could illustrate or convey the idea of pause. I could use the cylinder and add a couple boxes to it, but I'd like to share another cool resource with you. Font Awesome is, well, a website with awesome icons and logos as font resources for use on the web. Luckily for us, the icons are also available as SVG files. So I'm going to search for pause. These icons come in 2 different varieties. There's free versions and there's pro versions that you have to pay for. For this, I'm going to use the free versions. However, if you happen to use these icons for anything that you share with the rest of the world or you make money off of, I would highly advise that you go ahead and look at the pro versions. I like this circle one with the bars in the middle. I'm going to go ahead and collapse this to clean things up just a hair. We can see this icon laid out in a couple different patterns and backgrounds, but we need the SVG file, and that is at this link right here. And again, we've got some terms of service and talk about licensing, and we'll save that SVG file. Sadly, we don't have the ability to bring an SVG file directly into PrusaSlicer to work with. So, feature request? Luckily, I found this cool website called SVG to STL conveniently that will allow us to take our SVG file, import it, got to upload it, convert it, and this is going to ask us how high it needs to be. It doesn't really matter. And then we can download it as, conveniently enough, an STL file. Similar process as before. We're going to right click and we're going to go to add part. This time, instead of selecting a cylinder, we're going to use load. We'll grab that STL file and load it in. We'll scale it down and position it. For continuity, I'm going to click over and look at my other cylinder, which was 12.27, 0.4 high, drop, make sure they're down, and set to extruder 2. Sometimes you'll see a little bit of weirdness here. And I've noticed if you just slice the file, which this looks good, and kick back, sometimes it'll be all right. But we did slice it and we saw that it was all good to go. So that's just kind of a little bit of a visual oddity there, but it is good to go. Our third button is going to be for studio mode. Studio mode is more for live streaming, where it can be used for transitions. I haven't really done any live streaming yet, but it's something I aspire to. So we're going to run through that same process again, and this time I'm thinking a monitor type of image will work. And I think this one that says TV will be fine. I'm going to move our keycaps over out of the way a little bit, get some room, bring that file back in. Notice there's no error this time because we repaired it with 3D Builder. Same thing, we're going to add a part by loading it. Now in the bottom row of my keys, I'm actually using this particular icon for my monitor source key. So I am going to go ahead and set this one up and then duplicate it, and we'll modify the duplicate to make our studio mode key. And we'll set that to our second extruder as well. Before I drop this to the build plate, notice this icon right here now that says syncing. That is actually telling us that our keycap is sitting on the build plate, and part of our group, in this case it's the SVG STL that we just imported, is below the build plate. This is something new in PrusaSlicer 2.4. Originally you could never drop anything below the build plate like you could in Cura. Now you can, and there's a warning telling us that that's what's happening. Dropping that TV icon to the build plate makes it go away. And we will set that to 0.4 millimeters and drop it to the build plate. Slice, and excellent. I mentioned that we're going to go ahead and use this same base icon for the studio mode and for my main screen keycap. I could click this plus button up here and I could add another instance of it, but they're tied together. So if I alter one of them, it will alter both of them. So that's not going to work. What we need to do is just a regular copy and paste, and that can be a Control-C, Control-V, or we can use the icons up here in the toolbar. I'll go ahead and rename this one Studio just so we don't get them confused. And now what we're going to do is we're going to combine the first two techniques. We already have an icon loaded, but now we need to add a box. I'm going to be efficient and go ahead and change this to 0.4 millimeters high now, get that out of the way, and go ahead and change it to Extruder 2. So go ahead and grab that and scale it down, and I'm looking for that to be at the same width as the other parts. I think that's about right. And now we need to get our height. Oops. See, I grabbed the whole thing there. I need just the box. I think that looks right. Let's double check. Set that box to 0. It's at 0.05, so now we're exactly there. And slice. To keep the video as short as possible, I'm going to skip showing how to do the microphone because it's exactly the same way that we did the pause button. And I'm also going to skip showing you how I do the 7th button, which is the little popsicle person, which will be my webcam pointing directly at me. So I'm going to skip ahead and do those off camera, but then we're going to circle back and combine two different keycaps again. So now I have the 6 keycaps done, and we can go ahead and slice them and look at the preview by sliding all the way down. See that first layer, got my microphone. For the record, when I searched on Font Awesome, this icon is called User. We can see our first layer looks good, our second layer looks good, and then our third layer is solid red. So that means all of our icons are 0.4 millimeters high. Now we're going to take care of this 6th icon, which is my webcam inset in the bottom right hand corner of my primary monitor. To do that, we're going to combine these two icons right here. So I'm going to copy and paste my main screen, I call it Inset. Then I'm going to go over to my user. I'm going to copy just that STL. Then click on my Inset and hit paste. And that drops it into that same grouping. When we slice, we can see they're together. Of course, my user icon is too large, so we're going to have to scale it down. There we go. So we'll take a look at all of them. Those look great. Now for our final one, this is going to be for an auxiliary camera. For example, something like one mounted overhead and pointing down. And it's going to use the same process that we just used by taking 3 separate STL files and combining them together. But there's going to be a slight twist. So let me put this together for you real fast and I'll show you. I've gone ahead and assembled all the parts of this keycap now. We've got the keycap, we've got a down-facing arrow, and I've got my camera. However, I still have them all set to the default extruder so we can illustrate something. The order in which things are placed is important. I want the camera part to print in a different color and the arrow to print in the same color as the keycap, much like a similar combination that we have now. So I'm going to change that to extruder 2. It looks good here in my preview, so if we slice the file, we can see that the arrow is not being rendered. So let's change the order, put the arrow below and the video on top. And now when we slice, we'll see that that arrow is where we want it to be. So if we look at the order in which things are stacked over, you can see that it's kind of a bottom-up stacking order. The arrow is the lowest thing in our list, so it's got precedent, and then the video camera, and then the keycap. So when you're putting multiple things together, just be mindful of the order that they're in, just in case you get a result that you're not expecting. Scroll out here and take a look. Here's our first layer, our second layer, and then our third layer, and everything prints on up from there. The slicer is already set up to go ahead and use the MMU on my MK3. But let's go ahead and take a look at a couple little things here. We can see up in the top left corner and down here in the bottom right that we can see how much material is going to be used, how much material is going to go into the wipe tower, extruder 1, extruder 2, the grams, the weight. If we've put how much the filament costs, it can even do some rough calculations on how much our print will cost, and it will tell us how long it's going to take to print. Now with these, one of the things to pay attention to is this number of tool changes here. It's only doing swaps on those first 2 layers, and then it's that same color all the way out. And if we want to get an idea exactly how this is going to print, we can drag this slider back and forth, and we can see it's going to print that main color, and it's going to come back and fill it in. Something cool that's been added in PrusaSlicer 2.4 is the G-code output on the left-hand side here. As we slide this, we can see those changing. Now, as we look at this go by, we can see in here it telling us information like when it's changing objects, wipe starts, wipes ends, its layer heights, and when it starts its wipe tower and its specs for the wipe tower, and when this tool change takes place. It's going from PLA to PLA, and when it does an unload to pull one filament out and stick it back in. Now with the MMU, that's all automated, so we really don't have to worry too much about that. But when we go for the ender, it's going to be important to pay attention to those. Now for this print, what I'm going to do is I'm only going to print the top set of the keycaps. I'm going to print the bottom set without the MMU. So I can select my model and click this eye icon, and it will tell the slicer not to slice those models and ignore them. So we're going to print these on the MMU, and then we'll print the others without it. To print these without using an MMU and doing manual filament changes, we're using an M600 command. Let's go ahead and turn this top row off. And we'll turn on the bottom row that we're going to print. And we're going to change our printer from the MK3 with the MMU I'm going to grab my Ender 3. Now the Ender 3 does not have any multicolor capabilities, so we're going to have to add it. First thing we're going to do is we're going to go into our printer and we're going to lie to it. We're going to tell it it has 2 extruders. Once we've done that, we can go over here to the left hand side and select our extruders and go down here and change our preview color. I'm going to be printing these in black and white. While we're also here, we need to go into the custom G-code section, and this is what makes this work. We're going to come down to where it says Tool Change G-code. And we're going to type in M600. We already have that down here on the color change, but for what we're doing, by telling it it has an MMU unit and actually automating the swaps, the slicer is going to consider those to be tool changes. Now we can go to our print settings, and we're going to go to multiple extruders, and we're going to make sure that wipe tower enable is turned off. Now when we go back and we slice our file, we'll see just this bottom row of icons are black and white, but when we drag through this bottom layer, we'll go right to where it changes from the black to the white. And you can use your mouse wheel on this also to get real fine grained. And right where it changes over, we can come over here in this G-code and we can see M600 right there. That's going to make the printer pause, move the head to the side, and eject the filament and ask for a new filament. Now, depending on how your firmware is configured, your printer may go in a different location than another printer. The automated process for unloading and reloading filament may be a little bit differently. It may go ahead and eject the filament, or you may have to manually eject it. But once that filament is swapped, it'll come back and it'll begin printing. Now, we can do the exact same thing if you happen to have an MK3, but you don't have an MMU. I can use a stock regular MK3 profile. Now I change over, it's asking about changing some of these settings I made, and I'm just going to hit discard. So we'll go into print settings again. We'll lie and say we have 2. We'll do our custom G-code because that's the next thing in the list. Tool change, M600, extruders, black, white. Now because this is using a profile for the MK3 that could use an MMU, when we said there were multiple extruders, it automatically came in and we have that wipe tower turned on. So we need to turn that wipe tower off. Other than that, same thing as with the Ender. We'll slice, take a look at our first layer, drag back, we'll see our M600, and we're good to go there. So now let's see these print on these 2 printers. Here are the final prints. The black and red keys are from the MK3 with the MMU automating the swaps. The black and white keys are from the MK3 and manual swaps triggered by M600s. And the blue and off-white keys came off the Ender 3 with manual swaps and M600s as well. The MK3 prints took about 32 minutes each, and the Ender 3 print took about 42 minutes. What do you think? Pretty fancy, huh? Manual filament swaps can open up a whole new world of multicolor printing without the need for using a Prusa MMU2 or a mosaic palette, at least for smaller projects. The process can be maddening on larger projects. Here are a couple more examples of prints that I've done using just M600 before I got an MMU2. This is a 3-color receiver cover that I made for my truck. And these maker coins were printed for the 2020 Midwest Rip Rap Festival. Sadly, I never got to hand them out because the festival was canceled. Have you used an M600 before to do multicolor printing? Or has this video given you some project ideas? I'd love to hear about them in the comments, or feel free to hit me up on Twitter. A quick disclaimer again, I am not affiliated with Alien 3D in any way, other than I'm a customer, and all customers are eligible to use referral codes. But of course, I really would appreciate if you did use my referral code. I've included one for MakerBox as well. Thanks so much for sticking it out to the end. I have more PrusaSlicer videos in the works, so please subscribe and hit the notification bell so you can find out about it when they come out. My last video on the Toys for Tots campaign has really taken off, and it looks like 500 subscribers is within my reach. So hopefully I can do something special if that happens. Thanks again. And these would be the ones that didn't quite make it.